Hey everyone, this is Carter. Welcome to this episode of Making It Up, the podcast where I talk to writers of all sorts of different backgrounds and we just have a lovely conversation. And, honestly, I feel like I make a friend every time I have one of these things. A lot of times I'm talking to people who I don't know who they are. We've never spoken before. And at the end, hey, let's go grab a beer. Today, I spoke to Lara Elena Donnelly. So she is the author of the Nebula, Lambda, and Locus-nominated trilogy, the Amberlough Dossier, as well as short fiction and poetry, which has appeared in venues including Strange Horizons, Escape Pod, Nightmare, and Uncanny. And Laura's got an upcoming book, psychological thriller called Base Notes, and it's coming out in February of 2022. She was great to talk to. She's one of these writers who knew at a very young age that writing was what she wanted to do. She didn't know if she was any good at it, but she had some very influential teachers at a young age and went to some highly acclaimed workshops and just decided, hey, I am going to write. So she's got a lot of interesting stories about her own navigations of the publishing industry, including, just how long it takes between when you get a kernel of an idea for a book and when it actually physically hits the bookshelves. It could be years. So I think that's a story well received by people who are not that versed with the publishing industry, just to know that it does take a long time to get something published. And she also had a lot to talk about her experiences, working with the big five publishers versus working with Thomas and Mercer, which is an imprint of Amazon. And at the end of our conversation, we made up a really cool little kind of sleep paralysis story using a sentence from Tana French's The Searcher. So I hope you enjoy. This is my conversation with Lara Elena Donnelly. It's nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too.
Where are you? Where do you live? Not your street addresser.
I live in Harlem, in the great island of Manhattan, in the great state of New York.
Have you been staying healthy as much as you can in
Yes.
a very densely COVID-centric area?
Yes. Somehow my partner and I have both managed to escape getting COVID, despite having his brother and his brother's boyfriend over for dinner and finding out the next day that they were both COVID positive.
It's crazy.
Oh.
Yeah, I'm the same way. The walls are closing in. I've been healthy, but my kid's mom, and her boyfriend just came down with her, or just kind of getting over it, and the kids were there for days. And I'm like, there's no way we don't all have it, but somehow we didn't get it. So who knows? It's all a crapshoot at this point.
Oh, I was going to say there's a non-zero chance that my cat and or my boss will require my attention at some point. But I have put a hold on my work calendar, and I told my boss I would not be available. And he generally respects the work calendar, but the cat does not. So she's over here making her own fuss, but usually I can kind of multitask with her.
Cats are very welcome. I have a Bengal, and he doesn't like it when I come and sit at this desk. He gets really possessive. He just stands next to me and screams. So I always have to physically lock him up, lure him downstairs with treats, lock him up for the duration of when I do these interviews. So he's been sequestered at the moment.
Aww.
So are you from New York? Did you grow up there?
I am not from New York. I just realized one of the buttons on my shirt came undone, so bear with me. There we go. I'm from Ohio, actually.
Okay. Whereabouts in Ohio?
It's a very small town called Yellow Springs.
Okay.
It's close to Dayton, slightly less close to Columbus. Some people may know it as the home of Antioch College.
Okay.
But some people may never have heard of it at all. So,
Yellow Springs, Ohio sounds like the kind of place where some sinister shit goes down and the rest of the world doesn't really know about it. It's just got that ring to it.
It's definitely a place that seems incredibly idyllic when you visit. But if you stay there for a long time, you realize that, like many small towns, it does have a lot of small town drama
Some
in ways
insidiousness.
that could be construed as sinister. Yeah.
That's excellent. So that was a pretty quiet upbringing.
Yeah, I'd say pretty quiet. The adventures that I had as a young kid were mostly small town type adventures, like getting lost in the woods, in a way that, like, when you look back as an adult, you're like, wow, as a kid, I thought that was fun. As an adult, I'm like, wow, none of our parents knew where we were. The
Right.
town is surrounded on 3 sides by nature preserves. And so, like, none of our parents knew where we were. We definitely almost fell in a river. We definitely had no idea where we were going, ended up miles and miles outside of town and had to walk back. And I don't know if any of our parents ever found out that this had happened.
Right.
Our group got
it's
split up. There
horrifying.
were 4 people, and like 2 people went one way and 2 people went another because we had a disagreement on which direction we should go. It was like a horror movie scenario.
Totally.
But luckily, nothing happened to anyone that I know of.
As a father of an 18-year-old and a 16-year-old, I constantly look back and think, oh, if they did any of that kind of shit that I did when I was a kid, which again was kind of innocent, but like, oh, I could have died also. It's, I'm waiting today. So my son is supposed to get his license, and then that ushers in a whole new world of worry. So
yeah,
we'll see how it goes.
Good luck.
What did what did your parents do while you were growing up? What kind of work were they in?
Yes, my mom has worked at the same university for a long time, since I was probably 5. She's a career counselor. So her job is basically to help college students get jobs, which was very helpful when I was job hunting, the many times that I've been job hunting. My dad used to be a traveling salesman for a publishing company that mostly did like bookmarks and also sort of the fun novelty items that you can find in many bookstores. And then he had a lot of jobs. He worked as a technical writer in a plant that made television tubes. So like he wrote manuals for how to use the giant machines that would spit out like globs of molten glass. And then he became a phlebotomist briefly. And then after he was a phlebotomist, he went back to technical writing, this time for a company that made machines that separate corn parts. So they put the corn in and they get like oil and starch and germ and whatever else is in corn. So mostly he wrote about machines and occasionally drew blood.
I mean, what's interesting is with all those different professions, you actually know at a very detailed level what he did. Most kids are like, I don't know what my parents do. Like teacher is easy, or writer is easy, but all that stuff, you very detailed. You remember everything that he did, so that's pretty impressive.
This is very funny because when my partner was very small, he was doing like a Montessori school interview, and they asked him what his parents did, and his father, who worked in advertising, was an artist, and so he's like, oh, my dad is an artist. And they said, what does your mom do? And he said, I don't know. And they were a little concerned, and so they asked her, and she said, oh, I work in, and I don't even remember what it is she does. She does compliance for reinsurance companies. And they were like, oh, I have no idea what that is.
So where did the creative spark come from? Do you have a memory of wanting to write, or were you a bookworm? Where did that come from that you can identify?
Absolutely a bookworm. My mom is also a writer and an artist and a great storyteller. She used to tell me wonderful bedtime stories. And both my parents read aloud to me when I was a child. And then eventually I learned to read and read every book that seemed even remotely interesting in the teenager section at the library. And I had a lot of great teachers. I was going to skip right to the writing part of the story, but I'm going to actually rewind and say I had a lot of great teachers in 5th and 6th grade, I had Miss Pettiford, who did a lot of writing with us, specifically fiction writing. She would give us writing prompts, and we would go off and write our own little stories. Probably most of mine were absolutely insane, because when you have 5th and 6th graders write stories, they go hard in the invention part of things. And then in middle school, I joined something called Power of the Pen, which I think we only have in Ohio. I don't think they have it in other states. It is a competitive short story writing team. So like you and your team members from your school, all writers, go in against all these other kids from other schools. You have 3 rounds, and I think each round is like 45 minutes, maybe half an hour. You get a prompt and you write a short story, and then they judge them. And then at the end, there are like winners of the best of round, strongest team, and you get trophies. So
Wow.
my middle school experience was like, learn to write fast to prompts for recognition and trophies.
right. And you discover later that writing, there is no real payoff. Only as a kid do you get trophies and rewards. And as an adult,
I don't know. You can get trophies. You can get trophies as an adult. They give out some sweet trophies for like the Hugo Awards, the Nebulas.
Not everybody gets those, though.
No, well, not everyone got them in Power of the Pen. Only the winners. This was not one of those situations where they were like, and you get a participation trophy. It was like, no, your writing was not good enough for a trophy. Try again next time.
And it's interesting because I'm a judge in the National Scholastic Awards, and I tend to get the short stories. And it is interesting to see like these kids, these middle schoolers who, there's usually a pretty big range of, talent, but there's some that are just like, wow, these kids just know. They have it. I don't know how they have it, but it sounds like kind of similar to your situation. You were interested in that, but then it sounds like you probably found yourself with a natural ability. It came to you with the prompts like, oh, okay, yeah, here's a prompt. I can think of something that goes with that. Did you see that in yourself, and certainly relative to some other kids who really struggled with that kind of assignment?
I don't know. And if I sort of viewed my writing relative to other people's writing until probably when I was 17, I went to a workshop for teens who write science fiction and fantasy. And that was like the first time that I was in a workshop setting. But even then, I don't think it was like my writing versus their writing. It was more like writing in community. And in Power of the Pen, we didn't get to read, like we only would get to read the stories of the people on our team once we all got them back. Like we didn't get to read the stories that we lost to or the stories that we beat. So I don't think I really had a conception of whether other people were worse or better at writing than I was. I just loved doing it so much that I was happy to just be let loose. So
you knew then by that age that that's something that you wanted to study, to continue to get into through school?
I actually thought that I wanted to be a fashion designer for a long time. And I was doing college tours for art schools and eventually was dissuaded from fashion design at the Savannah College of Art and Design, where during a portfolio review, the woman who was reviewing my portfolio said, I think actually you should look into doing character design for like films and TV and video games, because you put so much thought into the entire illustration, not just the clothes. And I was like, oh, wow, okay, that's what I'll do instead. But by the time, easily persuadable.
Because this one person had one comment.
Yes. But by the time I had to choose which college I wanted to go to, I had decided I actually wanted to pursue a liberal arts degree and do like an English degree, which was problematic because I had mostly applied to art schools. And at that point I was like, well, what do I do now? My options are very limited. I don't know what caused the change. Probably Alpha, which is that workshop for teenagers, which is still extant. I serve on the board. I do a lot of administrative work for them. if you or any of your listeners know a teen from 14 to 19 who's interested in writing science fiction, fantasy, or horror, please look us up because we're a
That
great
sounds
program.
great. What's the website for that?
alphawritersworkshop.org.
Fantastic. So
I'm pretty sure now I'm like, oh God, is that our URL?
I'm sure they can find it based on that. So you were an English major.
I was, for my sins, an English major with a minor in women's studies, which was going to maybe be a minor in history. But then when you're like, okay, I have enough credits for this minor, but for the other minor, I'll have to take 2 more classes. You're like, I'll take the one I already got.
And then are you thinking, in your undergraduate years, like you were going to, go on for higher education after that, or you were going to hit the ground writing?
I was extremely prejudiced against MFA programs when I came out of my undergrad.
Had you heard stuff about them?
Why was I prejudiced against them? I think because in science fiction and fantasy, at that point, less now, but at that point, there were not a lot of genre-friendly MFA programs. So if you wanted to write
fantasy, I still think that's the case from what I hear.
Less now. Well, I mean, it's true that there are still a lot of MFA programs that are prejudiced against science fiction and fantasy. I think there is less prejudice against MFA programs in the science fiction and fantasy community now than there was. And I think also because there are a lot of MFA graduates who are now publishing what the literary establishment likes to call fabulism, which is basically like it's a story that follows a lot of literary conventions, but also has genre elements. That there are MFA programs that are now becoming slightly more genre friendly in some ways. There's still, I think, a lot of stylistic requirements that maybe rub science fiction and fantasy writers the wrong way, or like don't jive with a lot of the conventions of the genres they're writing in. So when I left college, I very much was like, I don't need to apply to an MFA program. And what I did instead was apply to the Clarion Workshop, which is the oldest residential workshop. I actually don't know. Don't quote me on this. It's a well-known residential workshop for science fiction and fantasy writers. Last 6 weeks, I applied to the version of it that happens on the UCSD campus. So I got to spend 6 weeks in San Diego writing basically a short story every week.
Wow.
And having critiqued by all of my classmates. And by week 6, I tell you, your brain is stuffed full of more information than you'll ever be able to process. You're like more exhausted than you have ever been. You're hanging on to your sanity and humanity by like your fingernails. But it was really, really valuable as an educational experience.
Yeah. I mean, first of all, the feedback alone, right? Because that's something that so many aspiring writers struggle with is like, I just don't want to show my work to anybody, which doesn't really do you much good if you want to be a writer. And a lot of people struggle with getting that feedback. And so it sounds like you were kind of thrown to the wolves in the Clarion program, but that's great because it does break you down. And I think the other hard part of all of it is when you're still kind of a young writer, it's hard to know what feedback you agree with, or it's easy to say, okay, I'm going to take all this feedback and incorporate it, but that doesn't work either. So you have to learn what feedback is right for that story.
Yeah, but this was luckily a lesson I had learned much earlier. So at Alpha, we follow a really similar critique model to the critique model that's used at Clarion. So we have a group of students, and you write a short story, and then you have to show it to the other students, and they will critique it. Like you get critiqued by your peers, you get critique from the mentors who are there. And I do remember the first year that I attended the Alpha workshop, going back to my room with all of my marked up manuscripts and being like, okay, I'm going to edit my story now. And realizing I had conflicting feedback. And I was like, how this person wants me to do this, and they say it will fix the story. This person wants me to do this, and they say it will fix the story. I can't do both of them. And I was like, what do I do? well, I have to take the feedback, don't I? And I think I got talked down by some staff member who was like, it's okay, you don't have to do this. So I was very lucky to have learned like to work with the critique process at like 17. And I think attending Alpha like probably fast forwarded my writing career by like 10 years, because by the time I got to Clarion, I was like, I was a terrible writer by the time I got to Clarion still, but I knew how to do critiques. I sort of understood how to like deal with feedback and fold it into the story. I kind of understood how to critique other people's writing. Obviously, it's like a massive learning process, and I am still learning and
Right.
still finding out how much I don't know. But I think that starting to work as a professional writer, like with the conceit that you are taking writing seriously from a very young age, is like really helpful later when you're like, okay, well, I've already been taking myself in this process seriously for 10 years, even if I've been garbage at it. Like now that I'm starting to get better at it, I don't have to learn all that stuff.
Right. Right. And you have to pay your dues. And just sticking with the idea of critiquing for a second here, because we don't talk about it on the show a whole lot. I've been in a critique group for, I don't know, 20 years, something like that. And part of, not only do you have to understand how to take and understand which critiques, you have to learn how to critique somebody else, which you kind of said that you learned a little bit about that, but that takes time too, because sometimes somebody will read your work and say, this is what you should do. And you could tell it's like them, thinking, okay, if I were writing this is exactly what I would do. That's not super helpful, as opposed to saying, I'm not connecting with your character, and I think it's because I'm not feeling any emotion from this character. And I'm not telling you how to change it, but I'm telling you the reflection that I get. I find that personally a lot more helpful. And same thing with the editorial process. My editor will give me notes, but not give me solutions. Just say, I need more of X, or, I'm feeling this is lacking. Go for it. Do you have that? When you get critiques, especially on a manuscript level from your editors, do you tend to prefer vague notes or very specific, you need to fix this way?
I really like to get questions. I love it when people are critiquing my work to be like, I noticed this happen and I didn't really understand it. So I have like specific question about what was this character feeling? Like why would they act in this way? Why did you make this particular choice? Because then it really forces you, instead of them being like, what if you took concrete action? And then you like look at the concrete action they've suggested and look at your story and you're like, I guess I could do that. But when they ask you questions, you really have to look at it and go, I don't know, why did I make this choice? And is it the best choice that I could make here? Or is there a better, stronger choice that would result in them not asking this question?
That's true. Yeah. And sometimes the questions will be like, what's the point of the relationship between these two people? And it's like it's a big question. Like, I don't know. I've never thought about that. And that's a great point too. When somebody gives you a very concrete action and you look at it and you're like, yes, I can see how this plugs in and works. You still have to be as a writer, emotionally connected to that decision, because otherwise you kind of feel like you're co-writing, if you're just taking somebody else's, and it feels like, it works, but it's probably not, emotionally how I would have done this, for better or for worse. And then it doesn't feel genuine to me. So I tend not to at least solicit specific ideas, even though they might be better than what I actually wrote, and often are.
I do feel like sometimes it's really helpful though. And there are all these, it's just like any kind of art, right? There are these hard and fast rules. And then as you sort of get deeper into it, you're like, oh, those hard and fast rules are not as hard nor as fast as I thought they were. I think there is definitely a use in critique for someone being like, okay, this isn't my story and you probably shouldn't do this. But if I were writing it, I would like, I don't know, like, one of my Clarion instructors, I think it was Delia Sherman, said she was a big proponent of the bad idea, where you go, okay, so what you have isn't working. And I think it needs to change. but I don't want to tell you how to do it. So like the bad idea, the really tropey, schlocky idea, or like a stupid idea I came up with while I was looking at this that you definitely shouldn't use, is that this happens instead.
Mhm.
And it kind of gives the writer a way to envision it. Sometimes it helps sort of frame the problem in negative space, where instead of identifying the actual problem in the story, you're able to say like, it doesn't work now, but it would work if you did this, even if you don't want to do it, and you probably shouldn't. Then the alternate solution kind of helps the writer see what the real problem in the story is,
Hmm.
even if they don't use the bad idea. Or sometimes people will be like, this is a bad idea, don't do it. And you'll be like, that's not a bad idea at all. That's incredible. And then you steal it and use it anyway.
or what you've already written is actually the bad idea, and then you're just screwed.
They're like, bad idea, keep the story the way it is.
So what point did you write your first novel?
It was the day that I was standing in the teen section at the library some summer in high school, and I realized I had read all the books I wanted to read, and there was nothing to read, and I was so bored that I just said, you know what, I will go home and I will write my own book. And I started writing a book, and I finished it, and it was quite bad, I'm sure. I actually haven't read it since then.
Mm-hmm.
I probably have a copy of it somewhere.
Do you remember how many words it was?
Enough that I won NaNoWriMo with it. I think it was probably in the 60,000 word range.
It's a proper size.
Yeah, a short novel now, I would call it, but I definitely finished it. I definitely have no desire to read it now.
Yeah, but that's a major, I mean, of course you say that. I mean, the same for me. My first novel that never published, I haven't gone back and looked at it, and it's hard to appreciate unless you can really look back or contextualize it for when the experiences of others, that you did that, especially at that age, which is crazy. That probably helped that you were like young and naive and you could write a novel. But my experience was kind of the same. I was much older, but like I didn't know what I was doing. And that helped me do it because I had no pretense that it was any good. So that it takes a weight off of you to let you actually finish it. You're like, sure, this is garbage, but I want to see if I can do this. Yeah. But I think the actual result is that, and it's probably buried down in there, but you've done something that's incredibly difficult to do. And that makes the rest of it going forward easier, because that is such a hurdle to so many people getting that first book done, whether it's, the speed paced NaNoWriMo or they've taken 3 years to do it. That's the biggest hurdle. So congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you. I think it was Jeffrey Ford, who's an amazing author that everyone should check out, sort of posited to a bunch of us at Clarion that like everyone has to write like, I don't know, 100,000 words of just crap. You have to like get it out. It's sort of like when
I've written much more than that.
Yeah. But he was like, you got to get that out, and then the clear water starts flowing. You have to get sort of the muck out first.
Well, that's very true, because I mean, whether you want to call it finding your voice or just, I like to consider you're getting into shape. My first 3 books didn't sell, and looking back at them, like, it's probably for the best. I'm glad that shit's not out there, but and you eventually like, okay, now I kind of I've built my muscle now, and with that becomes decisions. The decision-making process gets leaner and tighter, and the editing becomes much more smooth, and you have much more open eyes when you're doing it. So I agree. And I think it's more than 100,000 words. I think you need probably at least 2 or 3 times that in order to really find what might work for you or for the readers. So then when was your first novel that you sold?
The first novel that I sold, and this is just like so publishing industry, right? I sold my first book, Amberlough, in January 2015. Mm-hmm. And it came out in February 2017.
Oh boy.
So people ask me a lot, like, how long did it take you to write that book? And I'm like, do you want the answer that is like from the initial idea, like the very first kernel of the idea that eventually became this book? Do you want like from that moment to the moment it came out? Because the answer is like a million years. It took a million years. Or do you want like from, starting zero draft of the novel? Or do you want like, I wrote a couple of bad short stories set in the world of that novel, and then like, what do you want? Because it was such a long process of developing this. And now, of course, like when I wrote the sequel, they were like, can you write it in 3 months? And I was like, okay, sure, we can do that.
That's a lot of pressure. But it's true. That is a very typical, I mean, that's probably longer than most, but that's still, people outside the industry don't realize when you sell your book, it's going to be probably 18 months before it comes out. And there's so much that has to happen then. And this is why, you should never chase trends, because they will be different by the time, I think about the difference between 2015 and 2017. The world changed in those 2 years, and any trend you might have been doing wouldn't have worked at all. So was that frustrating for you for it to take so long, or were you just like, okay, I'm going to keep plugging away at my other stuff, and it didn't create too much noise in your head?
I think I was at the time pretty frustrated, especially because it was supposed to come out in summer 2016 and it got pushed. So that was probably the moment where I was like, oh.
You want a summer book, yeah.
But I really benefited from it in the long run because, as you say, the world changed, and Amberlough was about it. I was pitched as like Cabaret meets Le Carré, right? So it's a spy thriller set in a fantasy world, and there's a fascist party that is really on the rise and aiming to take over the country. And at the time I was writing it, I was just like, oh, I really liked Cabaret, and I'm very interested in like, the lives of like interbellum socialites, between the wars. And I was just writing it because it's something I was interested in. And then when the book came out, or like in the sort of, in the lead up, the publicity lead up, like the 6 months before the book comes out or whatever, it was like right after Trump had been elected. It's like Trump's running, and then he's elected, and then he's inaugurated. And I'm like at book fairs or like doing interviews or like, doing book promo stuff. And everyone will be like, so how does it feel to have written this book that's so in tune with our present moment? And it got to the point that people would, like my publicist would say, is there anything that you don't want the interviewer to ask you? And I'd be like, please tell them not to ask me about fascism, because every interview that I was doing was like, tell us your opinion about what's happening in America right now. And I was like, I'm living what's happening in America right now. I don't want to have to turn my book promo into what's happening in America right now.
Right. Do you know how much I'm trying to actively avoid the news? Can we just not talk about it and talk about all other aspects of the book except for that for right now?
It was rough. It was really rough. But the book ended up being, if I never have to hear the word timely again, it will be too soon. But it did, I think, end up getting the book a lot more attention than it might have gotten as like a secondary world fantasy, no magic, gay romance. I think before the whole Trump situation, my team, like my editor and my agent and my publicity people were like, well, we really like it. We think it might be kind of a niche book. It'll be kind of hard for it to find its audience. And then everyone was like, it's an oracle, which was really weird. It was really weird.
It puts a lot of pressure on your next book, right? You're like, all right, now what am I going to predict?
Yeah, I was like, whoa, I don't want to like write this book and have it come true. That would be alarming.
And so fast forward then to the book that you have coming out, I believe, next month, Base Notes, correct? That's less sci-fi fantasy. That's more kind of straightforward thriller-ish, or?
Yeah, I would call it like a psychological thriller. It's kind of Highsmithy. It's got like a really unlikable narrator / protagonist, who nevertheless you're like, yeah, do the unlikable thing. I'm rooting for you. It does have kind of a speculative element. So the premise is that there's a perfumer, like a niche indie perfumer in New York, who's really trying to make ends meet, and it's just not working out. The spreadsheets are all red at the end of the month. But, a lot of people in New York have a side hustle to make ends meet. So Vic Fowler has discovered a way to create a perfume, a kind of perfume that lets the wearer relive, like vividly relive, as if they are in the moment, any memory that they have with a person in it. The problem is that to create that perfume, the person in the memory has to be an ingredient in the perfume. So Vic will get commissions from people who are like, I want to relive whatever moment, like my first kiss. I want to relive, the moment that I broke ties with my abusive father. And Vic will be like, okay, and go kill that person and then distill them into a perfume ingredient, put them in the perfume. And the speculative element, if it is that these perfumes can create such vivid and immersive memories. And it could be magic, it could be brain chemistry. We're never really sure.
Right.
It doesn't really matter. Like whether it's magic doesn't really matter. What matters is how much money you can get for it.
Right. Oh, I love it. It's got a little bit of a Sweeney Todd element to it.
Oh yeah, and it gets very Sweeney, where like when you're watching Sweeney Todd, you're like, yeah, okay. And then in like the last 20 minutes, you're like, everyone is dying. Everyone in this story is now dead. The bodies awesome. Really pile up towards the end of the book.
What was your experience like negotiating and just getting signed up with Thomas and Mercer and Amazon? Was that just a different experience than going with Tor and some of the other publishers, or did it all feel kind of similar?
It was different from Tor in the sense that Thomas and Mercer is like a very well-oiled machine. Working with Tor, I think, is working with Tor is a much more like trad pub experience where you're like going out for drinks with your editor, and it's like not really business, but it's kind of business, and maybe you can get some gossip, and you're constantly sort of like emailing people being like, excuse me, when is this happening? And like they'll copy out your agent and you'll copy your agent back in, and like it just feels very in line with the experiences that many other authors I know have had at like any of the like the big 5 publishers, right? The very trad pub, very established, this is how the publishing industry works kind of publishers. Whereas like working with Thomas and Mercer is much more like working with, I don't even want to say a tech startup because I work at a tech startup, and it's like honestly sort of similar in its level of chaos to the publishing industry. Working with Thomas and Mercer just feels like they have steps for everything, and they're always ready before you're even ready. They're like, we've got these calls lined up. Like, this is how you access your royalty statements through our author portal. Like it's just very organized.
Yeah.
In a way, like it's just a different experience. Neither is like better or worse. They also have like a very different editorial process than TradPub, which kind of took some getting used to.
In terms of not as much interaction?
No, I definitely had a lot of interaction, but like with my previous books at Tor, I had one editor, and we had a really close working relationship. We like talked about the book really deeply. All my feedback came from her. She had like a very, I don't know if I want to say like vested personal interest, because I'm sure like any acquiring editor has a vested personal interest in the book, but it really felt like the book was almost a collaboration. And we were like on a level that like one time she sent me an edit letter that just started with like, well, this is definitely the weakest of the 3 books that you've sent me. And I was Jesus. Like, oh my God.
That's the worst that you could start the letter with.
I was like, I'll die now. But then it was sort of like, okay, now that we've gotten that out of the way, there are a lot of things I like about it. And I just like really felt it was like a very trusting, very close relationship about the content of these novels.
Right.
And at Thomas and Mercer, there's your acquiring editor who does a pass, and then they bring in a second editor to do like the second dev edit pass, so that you get two different points of view, which is really interesting because it kind of puts you in that position of being the kid at writing camp who's gotten like two different pieces of feedback, and you're like, oh, which one do I use? I can't. So
you get that second one before you've made the changes from your acquiring editor.
No, you get the acquiring editor letter. You make the changes. You send the new draft, and then you get a second edit letter, like a second dev edit from a second editor. And they've never
seen the original.
I think that they might have. I think they see the original, and then they see the new dev edit.
That's interesting.
And maybe I can't remember. I'd have to go back through my emails, but I think they do. It was just very like, oh, and they were kind of editing for different things. Like they clearly both had, and I had asked for, could I have an editor who would be like conversant enough in science fiction and fantasy to kind of see where this book was landing, because we were hoping it would be a crossover. It was like, it's a thriller, but it kind of has spec, and it's in a very literary style. So the first edit pass with my acquiring editor, who is like very thriller literate, like she is the head of Thomas and Mercer, which is the thriller imprint that has sort of like devoured the science fiction and fantasy imprint. Mm-hmm. So like she's very conversant with the sort of conventions of the thriller genre. So she was clearly doing like a very thriller edit. And then the second editor used to be the head of the fantasy and sci-fi imprint there. And he was like very, but he was also kind of doing like a literary style pass as well as a fantasy and science fiction pass. So it was kind of like having several different dev edits.
Wow.
For like as if it were three different books almost. It was very interesting.
Yeah. Well, that's a good experience at least. So you're excited for your book to come out, I assume, and you have.
Oh my God.
I'm sure it didn't take 2 years this time. I'm sure it was much faster.
It was faster. It did still take some time. I'm trying to remember when I actually sold it. Sometime in 2020, the hateful year.
Right. Right.
Sometime in 2020, maybe toward the end of 2020, maybe even early 2021. So like definitely less than 2 years. And it's actually kind of out already right now because it was an Amazon First Reads pick. Right. So for people who have Prime subscriptions, they're already like downloading it and reading it and leaving reviews. Right. Which is kind of weird because I'm like, my book, it's coming out soon, except you can kind of already read it, but it's not out yet.
Yeah, it's always crazy when I'm researching somebody and a lot of people I talk to have books that are coming out soon, and I'll go on the 3,000 reviews. I'm like, oh, this has got to be a Thomas and Mercer or one of the other imprints for Amazon. And sure enough, like, before the book even comes out, there's like thousands of reviews. I'm like, oh my God, that's amazing. But
what's really wild is like, it was released as one of the thriller picks for Amazon First Reads. And I just had this feeling. I was like, I know what's going to happen, which is a lot of people who are really used to reading like a particular kind of mainstream thriller are going to be like, oh, a thriller. And they're going to read it and they're going to be like, what is this? Because it's not like a straight up thriller. It's got a lot of other weird stuff going on. It's told in a somewhat off-putting. I don't think it's off-putting, but I can see how other people would think it is off-putting narration with like a lot of high-flown language and like a narrator who clearly does not care if you are like keeping up or on their level or any of these things. In fact, would prefer if you were not. And it's got like the speculative element. And I just could feel, I was like, this is a much more of a crossover novel that is not quite neatly slotted into the thriller category. So people are either really going to get it or they're really not. And indeed, the reviews are kind of bearing that out, where people will be like, wow, this was amazing. Or like, did not finish, 1 star, could not get into it. So it's just been very fascinating.
Yeah. And you're going to have a much bigger audience now through Thomas and Mercer, I think. So, I think that's the net result of that, is that you're reaching people who don't know you and have an expectation of what a thriller should be. And there's nothing you could do about that. I mean, I run into that too, because my books are all standalone. They're thrillers, but they're pretty out there. They're pretty dark. And some people are like, yeah, this wasn't at all what I thought this was. And sometimes that's the greatest feedback ever. They're like, this is so much better than what the book jacket said it was going to be, or whatever, because they try to package it in a way that's like, okay, I can digest this in 30 seconds, but it's always a challenge. Well, listen, we're going to do a little storytelling.
Oh boy.
Talking about writing prompts. This is the fun part of the show. This is the improv part.
I've been dreading this. I'm so bad at like speaking stories. I'm much more of a typer. So I'm like, oh no, how's this going to go?
Well, this can be speculative. We can do it anyway. There are no set real rules for this. I talked to Maureen Johnson, and she's like, I can't tell a story unless I'm physically typing. So we just kind of talked about like, well, what would this be about? But but we'll give it a try. We'll see what happens. So I've got 3 books here, and I'm going to have you pick one, and then we're going to pick a page and pick a sentence, and then we'll just go back and forth. We've got Ali Land's Good Me, Bad Me, which is a great novel. Tana French's The Searcher, which I actually haven't read. It's just been sitting on one of several books on my nightstand. And then this, what is today? Today's Wednesday. This just came out yesterday. Lars Kepler's The Merriman, and really cool author. It's a married couple from Sweden, and I hosted their In Conversation yesterday for their launch event, and they write really, really dark, brutal stuff, and they are the sweetest couple.
Of course they are.
I know. That's the thriller writers are the most normal, well-adjusted people, and nobody believes us. So pick one of those.
Let's do Tana French.
Okay. And give me a page between 1 and 400, say.
279.
Oh, that's my favorite page.
That's where all the good stuff happens. Page 279.
Right at the beginning of the 3rd act. And give me a sentence between, say, 1 and 10.
6.
Okay. So this is going to be, I don't know if it's going to be easy or difficult, but it's a very short sentence. So I'm going to read this sentence, and then you give me a sentence or two, whatever you feel comfortable with, and then I'll give a sentence or two, and we'll see. The world is our oyster. We can do whatever we want. Here we go. For a second, he can't move.
For a second, he can't move. It's like the electrical impulses from his brain won't travel down his spinal cord, won't animate his limbs. He is a consciousness trapped in a sack of bones.
He'd heard of sleep paralysis before, but he'd never experienced it. This can't be what that is, he thought. But he realized he was fully awake, and he couldn't move a muscle. His dog saw him on the floor and walked over, began licking his ear.
This was somewhat preferable to visitation by aliens, Satan, or other disturbing visions, which he had heard were common with sleep paralysis. But his dog had truly terrible breath, and if he didn't get up and do something about it soon, his whole head was going to smell like that for the rest of the day until he could get to a shower.
He tried to push the panic and the fear down, telling himself that it would all be over soon and his limbs would be fully functioning in just a matter of seconds, maybe minutes. This helped calm him a little bit until his dog started barking wildly, racing for the door. Then the front door opened and a man wearing all black walked in. He could see his face, but it was almost beyond description. It was so plain. The man walked up over to where he lay and said, "Hello, John."
There must have been some mistake. His name was Eric. He tried to think if he had ever met this man before. He tried to think, did he know anyone named John? Oh man, come on, brain. Give me something. But before he could come to a conclusion about his situation, the man in black knelt down and grabbed him by the hair so that they were face to face and eye to eye.
Catherine says hi, the man said. Eric didn't know any Catherine, nor did he know any John. Surely this man had the wrong house, had the wrong person. She's the one who did this to you, the man said. She's the one that'll have to pay the price for when the police come. But she at least allowed me to have the honors of being here for this moment, your final minute.
Eric could hear his dog outside now, barking, howling at the approaching sirens. He wondered how soon they'd be here. Did he really only have 1 minute left? 1 minute. He looked at the clock on the VCR. I guess it is the 90s. He looked at the clock on the VCR, which read 2:37. Would he be dead by 2:38? What a stupid time to die. 2:38 p.m.
I love that as an ending. What a stupid time to die. That's a great line. Oh, that was fun.
Yay!
That wasn't so scary, was it?
No, I only froze up twice.
No, you were great. I always think that's a good exercise, and it's great to do that for your brain. I think just to give yourself the challenge of like, okay, I accept whatever premise you give me, and you accept whatever premise I give you, and let's. And while we were talking, you and I have different voices, and I love that, Mike. Okay, if we were reading this, you could tell who wrote what sentence, but I think that really magnified the story. So I don't know. It's fun. It's fun to get it to be creative with another person on the fly.
But I think we have a similar sense of pacing, because right when you brought in the man in black, I was like, we need another character in this scene. And I was like, okay, if he doesn't bring someone in, I'm bringing a high-heeled shoe, like right in front of Eric's face.
Yeah.
So we both have the same instinct of like, we need to get someone else in here.
Right. Yeah. I had this idea that like, what if it wasn't sleep paralysis? What if he's actually been drugged? And who did that to him?
Catherine. Oh,
yeah.
Catherine. She's
the worst. Well, listen, Lara, congratulations on your upcoming release. I'm very excited for you, and for all the successes you've had, all the nominations you've had. You've had a tremendous career. That's many, many years to go.
I hope so. Thank you so much. This was so much fun.
Awesome. Well, congrats again, and we'll talk soon.
Yeah, I hope so.
Take care.
I'll see you around.
Bye. So that was my conversation with Lara Elena Donnelly. I told you it was good. It was good. She had a lot to say. She's got a lot of experience. Wrote her first novel when she was a teenager. So if that's not experience, I don't know what is. If you want to know more about her, you can go to laradonnelly.com. Note that's Lara Donnelly. If you want to know more about me, or sign up for my newsletter, or read about my upcoming release, just go to carterwilson.com. That's it for now. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. More episodes coming out soon. Until then, take care.